So as we start looking at ethics in today's class, I want to begin by asking students to write down 2 or 3 big ethical issues that you face as teachers. And then while you're doing that, I just want to reflect briefly on the importance of ethics for teachers. I find that ethics is very, very valuable for helping us to think. It helps sharpen your thinking because it raises important questions about authenticity and what is true. And it'll be very valuable for your students if you take time at periods during the year when you stop and discuss, why do we hold this ethical view? What's the foundations of that ethical view? It'll help them with their thinking. It'll also be useful in terms of behaviour and providing strong, sound foundations for their behaviour. So whichever year level you're working in, I think it's worth taking some time to think about ethics and ethical issues. And we're going to look at some of those today. But before we start, let's think about some of the situations where we're going to need to consider ethical issues. So if I can start with Sally and then Gabriella. Sally, what's 1, 2 or 3 ethical issues that teachers face?
I'm not really sure. I'm sure there are many.
Yeah.
Could there be ethical issues in relation to like grading or like assessments?
Absolutely. That's one of the big ones, is grading and assessment. So, I've often said to my students, and you could even do this here, if you want to post me a meringue or a cheesecake, or if you're able to staple them to the front of your assignment, then, but there could be ethical issues with that. Gabriella, what do you think are some ethical issues that are faced?
One that I was thinking of is that whole idea of the impact of different kids' socioeconomic status within a classroom. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important one. And often people either favour the wealthy or they do a reversal. They favour the down and out and they look down on the wealthy. So the socioeconomic one is a big one. And then associated with that can be cultural. People will often favour a particular culture and not favour another one. One of the students I spoke to recently spoke to me with a French accent, and I thought, wow, do I give them extra grades just for their accent? So that was an ethical issue. Abby and Alex. Abby, can you think of one?
I had social diversity written down as one of them.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it? And the other thing with social diversity, it raises equity. That is, to treat all people as equal. And this is another family issue with brothers and sisters. Parents try and treat everyone equally. Does that mean that if you buy a push bike for one brother or sister or a daughter or son, you have to buy push bikes for everyone? I mean, that's a real challenge for parents as to how do you treat the children equally? And in the classroom, you've got to try and treat children equally. One of the real problems with equity in the classroom is that they're not equal. You've got short and tall students. You've got male and female, gender. There's all sorts of differences. Some are maturing earlier and some later, and some are more thinking students, some are more emotional, some are more social, just want to talk all the time, some are more active, others are more shy. And the challenge is we are called to treat them all equally. Alex, what's an issue?
I had a couple, but one that hasn't been said yet, discipline.
Yes, what can you say about discipline?
I guess it's an issue because of the ways in which teachers are allowed to deal with students who have, or punish students that have done something wrong.
And this raises a huge question for society too. How do we punish people? Isolation is usually a more accepted way. And so if we can put a student misbehaving, one of the things that we want in discipline is correction. We want them to reflect, and often it's important to debrief and talk through with the student. What do you feel you've done wrong? We want them to own what they've done wrong. And so discipline needs to have a purpose and a direction to it. And then one needs to be careful of aspects of discipline that aren't acceptable. And so each school may have different policies. Kieran, some thoughts on ethical issues that come up for teachers?
I suppose where to intervene when accidentally overhearing about personal issues of students, because they're obviously going to talk in the classroom and you're going to hear stuff, and it's just where do you draw the line of letting it go and where to intervene?
Yeah, so good. So certainly confidentiality is going to be important with students. And this then raises what happens in terms of safety. And so if issues are raised and that there's unsafe behaviours with alcohol or drugs, some schools have had big issues with vaping. And so what do you do if you have some information that relates to these unsafe behaviours? And I think safety is one of the big issues that one has. Have you ever heard the saying, don't run with scissors? And so we've said that occasionally to our children and to our students. And then lo and behold, one day one of my daughters ran with bare feet from one end of the house to the other, dropped a pair of scissors and kicked her bare foot into the scissors and sliced open the top of her foot. So who would believe? But there are huge safety issues there. And I might have mentioned before, I know one science teacher who used to mix up gunpowder. He'd put sulfur with charcoal, and then he'd hit that with a hammer and make a bit of a bang, and then he'd add something else to it and hit it with a hammer, make more of a bang. Students loved it, and the room was filled with smoke. But I don't know exactly how safe some of the activities we are, but there are so many safety areas that we need to be very careful of. And then there are reports that we need to fill in before we go on a camp or an activity, and then after we go on a camp or activity. So there's a lot of issues that we need to consider. As a Bible reading for today, 1 Peter 3:15, in your heart set apart Christ as Lord. So as Christians, the Lordship of Christ is a part of our ethics in terms of our thinking and behaviour. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. So our ethics is a hope-filled, love-filled, caring, peaceful ethic. Do this with gentleness and respect. Groucho Marx once said, these are my principles, and if you don't like them, then I've got others. Can you see there's a problem with that? It means they're not principles if you've got that. And so as Christians, there are principles, but we need humility. Imagine, is lying wrong? So hands up if you think lying is wrong ethically. So a few hands go up. So if you're hiding some Jews in World War II and a enemy soldier comes to the door and knocks on the door and says, are there Jews in your house? So can I ask a couple of you, what answer should you give and why? So the more challenging question ethically is, why do we give the answer that we do? So can I ask Gabriella and Abby and then Kieran, what answer do we give Gabriella? Are there Jews in your house? And
Well, I think my answer in my head would obviously be no, but then the way I would verbalize that is probably through a bit of prevarication and ambiguity in terms of why would there be Jews in my house? Just so, I don't know. So it's not directly lying.
Sounds good. Trying to find a middle position. Abby, your thoughts, and then Karen.
I like what Gabby just said. And that was smart. Well, it's hard because you have to think about the why behind, like the why. Wait, I was gonna say the why behind the why you're lying, but the reason as to why you're lying, I think that's challenging. But I like what Gabby said about sneaking your way around. It's not actually lying, but
Sounds good. Karen, your thoughts on this?
It's interesting because I don't own a house.
So where would they hide? In your bedroom? What if you got them in your
Well,
bedroom?
it's not mine. There are Jews in the house, but there are no Jews in my house.
All right. So you got a clause to escape from it. Alex and then Sally.
Yeah, I was going to say what Gabriella said at first, just answer their questions with questions. But I think that, I don't know if you know the story, the hiding place.
Yes.
I think there was a way that Corrie ten Boom answered their question, which is very similar,
Yeah.
but without lying. And
Yes.
so I'm sure there are ways that you can do it without
Yeah,
lying.
that's good. Yeah. And then Sally, your thoughts?
I think I'd probably just say no and in myself be like, this was to protect the people.
Yeah. And that's a good point to move the discussion forward, in that in saying no, you realize that there are two ethical dilemmas, and then they're in tension with each other. And sometimes you've got to make a choice, which one is more important. So one way to deal with this is to realize that you don't just have one ethical dilemma or choice, you have two. And then you could think through, how do the two weigh up? That is one of them the lesser ethical dilemma, and one of them the more important one, being the life and death one, as opposed to lying. This also raises the thought about law, in that law can be overgeneral, and thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal. What about stealing a loaf of bread to give to someone who is starving? Again, in the Second World War. And so there is a weakness in laws. And this is why I think the Apostle Paul in Galatians and in Romans challenges legalism. And so legalism can be used in a number of different ways. And the danger with legalism, particularly in terms of circumcision, is that it's a mark of culture, but it often isn't so healthy, despite having these cultural laws. And the same too with lying. Certainly the general principle is true, but a more important principle is love, kindness, and goodness. And so in lying, you may in fact be standing up for love, kindness, and goodness. So there's some of the issues that are raised there. And it's important for teachers because we model ethics. And I think it's important to model love, kindness, and goodness. And it's not so necessary to model legalism, that is, very strict following of laws, though it's important to realize that laws are important. If there's a law on the side of the road in terms of speed, it's there for a reason. But if it's an emergency and we've got to get somewhere fast, then the law is there for people, as Jesus said about the Sabbath being there for humans and for man. That is, man is not there for the law. So imagine if you were to find $1 on, let's say, it just happened to be next to your car or bus when you're hopping in. Any thoughts on what you might do with $1, Alex? lying on the ground, what might you do?
Just put it in my pocket, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. So would you take the $1 to the police station or something
No.
like that?
No.
No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. I found a watch once, and I took it to the police station, and they didn't seem overly interested, but I gave it to them, and then they said if it wasn't claimed in 3 months, come back and you could have it. I don't think I ever went back for the watch. Now, Sally, if you found $10, what would you do lying next to your car or the bus?
If it was just out in the open, I'd probably just take it. But if I was like at a place like a cafe or a restaurant, I would probably just hand it in.
Yeah, I think that's right. And particularly if it was at the school in the classroom or something like that, you might hand it in there. And then Gabriella, we're putting the pressure on here. If you found $100 lying next to your car at a school car park or something like that, what would you do?
I think that's that same situation as you hand it in and or search and ask people, hey, have you lost money?
Yeah,
That sort of thing.
yeah, sounds good. And then Abby, if you found $1,000 in an envelope lying next to your car or something like that, what do you do?
I was hoping I wouldn't get this one. I don't know. I guess it would just depend like where and if there's like, I mean, I don't know if it's an envelope, it could have come from anywhere. I'd probably hand that into the police station.
Yeah, sounds good.
Something
And then
like that.
Kieran, we're up to $10,000 lying next to your car in a big envelope.
If I found $10,000, I'm not even touching it. Get some gloves for that one and take that to the police station because I don't want my fingerprints being associated with that one.
That sounds good. But it does show that the one idea of finding something has lots of different outcomes. Another example could be the example of a democratic country that you go to and then discover that all the women have the political power and the jobs, and the men just accept what the women say. And then the question is, what would you think in such a situation? Would you accept that, or would you think, having learned something about equality, do you step up for equality? So there are a number of issues raised by these questions in terms of power, indoctrination, participation. This also raises questions as to what is ethics. It raises questions, what is the right thing to do? And it raises questions of how we understand these different ethical ways of behaving and acting and what is the right thing to do. So in terms of how we respond in terms of ethics, a few notes that I've put together on ethics and critical thinking for teachers. Ethics is very helpful for helping train us how to think more deeply. And so I think it's one of the great subjects to look at and to include in your classroom teaching, because it really does challenge students, not only in their thinking, but also in understanding character and the nature of humanity. As Christians, we understand the world's been made good and we have a commitment to God who is good and his good creation. But in ethics, we also understand that there are certain flaws in the world, natural and also within the way humans can be focused on self rather than that which is true. Ethics is useful for teaching us about social behavior and relationships. It's also useful for helping us understand feelings and social relationships. It's essential that educators recognize their unique role that they have in society by honouring the standards that they have and that the people and organisation around them have. And it's important to realise that some places are going to be more positively, ethically oriented than others. I was going to say motorbike group wearing leather, but then again, not every motorbike group wearing leather is going to be so negative. I got invited as a Christian to speak at a motorbike group that had a lot of Christians in. So my wife and I hopped in our car and drove down to the motorbike group. Unfortunately, I realised that I was the only person driving on 4 wheels. Everyone else had 2 wheels, so I felt a bit out of place. I was the only person wearing clothing like this. I wasn't wearing torn T-shirts. I didn't have tattoos. I didn't have leather, so I did feel a little bit out of place. But I shouldn't judge and label people from a different cultural group, should I? It's parents are the first teachers of children, but teachers are the second most influential. That is, you are role modeling ethics every time you teach. Ethics is the study of right and wrong, duties and obligations, and it is influenced by the people around us. It's influenced by our worldview, and it continues to develop during our life journey, and it can get worn out a bit too. Ethics involves critical reflection on morality and our ability to make choices between values and to examine moral dimensions of our thinking and relationships. In a profession like teaching, we uphold the professional ethics of the organisation, of the school, of the role that we take on. So there is ethics in what we do. So we need to think about what's right and wrong where we are. Now, some ethical responsibilities are clear cut and spelt out, but others involve dilemmas. And so what if you leave work early and don't put in the full day? And I've had that happen. I've gone to a deputy principal and said, what should I do? And deputy principal has said, oh, you'll have to make up that time. How long is it going to take, to get your dental work done or something like that? Oh, you have to make that time up. And then on my way out, I've met the headmaster principal who said to me, where are you going? And I've said, going to get this dental work done, but don't worry, I'll make the time up. The principal said, oh, don't worry about that. You put in so much hours and time anyway. So 2 different people giving me 2 different messages about ethics. So there are dilemmas that we often face. Codes of ethics is important. It's worth knowing what's the code of ethics of your school. And you'll find that there can be different cultural codes of ethics. Do you have to stay there? Have you come across this in schools? Every school has a different guideline. And some schools, they will have teachers who will stay till 5 just to impress everyone else who's working. And then that'll sneak even higher. Some will impress people even more by staying till 6 and 7. And you wonder if after a few years, everyone will be there till midnight trying to impress one another ethically. Yes. And so there can be different ethical issues spelt out and worked out, but you've also got to have your own values as well. Sometimes you need to look for legal advice as well. And so if someone says they're taking drugs or something else is going on, you need to think through what areas of confidentiality, what are the areas of legal advice that are needed. In ethics, it's important that we think through the values that we have. Each of us have values, and then each organisation has values. And as Christians, there are values we hold as well. So just want to briefly mention some types of ethics that we'll come back to. One is meta-ethics. This is the foundational view, the big question. Where do your ethical views come from? And so we can talk about that after the break. Another aspect of ethics is what's the norm that is around here? What's the norm in terms of ethics? And then thirdly, there is applied ethics. And applied ethics refers to how's it outworked in practice? What guidelines? So after the break, we'll come back and we'll talk about what are the big reasons that people propose for holding ethical issues that can help us with our ethics. We'll talk a bit more about the norms that are often held, what guides these norms, and we'll also talk a bit about application. How's it worked out? So thank you each one. Let's take our break there. And if at the end of the next session of 1 hour, you have any more questions about the essay as well, we'll have 5 or 10 minutes at the end where that can be looked out. And then Alira has given, I would rather live with the lie than watch people die. That's very good, Alira. So I appreciate that as well. And sometimes there's little ethical areas and some people get hung up on the little things, but Alira, you've identified very well there can be big ethical issues at stake as
Thank
well.
you.
See you shortly after the break. Thank you, each one.